let us kick it off. Welcome everyone to today's Sifted Talks in partnership with Deel. We've got some amazing panelists to talk about our topic today. We've got Vanessa from Pitch. Hi, Vanessa. We've got Daniel, VP of People at Vinted, Elena from Northzone, and Matt from Deel. Today, we're going to be talking about how early stage startups can scale, make that important leap from 5 people to 50 people. What should you do? Who should you be looking to hire? What sort of resources can you lean on? And how should you prioritize hiring? We do have a question and answer function in today's panel discussion. So please just drop your questions if you have any of them into the Q&A, and we'll leave a couple of minutes at the end of today's discussion to get into those questions. So just feel free to leave those in there throughout the discussion. So let us get into everything. I feel like this is a huge topic that we hear about all the time from founders that we speak to at Sifted, this crucial early stage in a startup's life. Maybe we can go first to Vanessa, since, Pitch is such an interesting example of a company that's really baked people in, right? You are a co-founder and also a people person. Talk me through how you thought about this early hiring. How did you ensure that you built the kind of culture at Pitch from the super early stages to that, a little bit later stage?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, first of all, thank you for having us and having this panel. It's a very important topic. So I'm excited to explore this topic with you all today. I think and from my angle, I've been a people-centric co-founder running HR, hiring and building everything from scratch. And I think when you have a co-founder that's purely thinking about that, I think you also set a lot of different intentions towards how you build the company, because usually founders are doing this on the side. It's usually not the most favorite thing people think about, because it's the product and getting things started, but not necessarily hiring and processes and people. And it's usually a side thing in the beginning for a lot of business founders. And for us, we really set a lot of attention into how we hire, who do we hire, and why do we hire people? Why are they the right fit? And for us, of course, it was always very important to find people that really connect with the vision that we have for the product, that really connect with also who we are as a founding team, how we work and what our ideals are. I think that it's really important to find people that help you amplifying this vision that you have in the beginning, because those 20 people, those 30 people will help you hiring the rest of the team. They will also set the processes with you. They are also talking to the rest of the team about how we do things. And that was really important for us to get the right people in place with the right motivation and connection to what we are doing. For us, the remote aspect has always been also quite an important foundation around how we build Pitch and putting there the right processes in place for scaling remote has also been an aspect. But yeah, just some thoughts in the beginning here.
Super interesting. Daniel, what about Vinted? How did you guys think about this scaling question at the beginning, particularly as it pertains to scaling culture and setting that foundation of culture?
Yeah, so look, at Vinted, I actually joined at 300. So I wasn't part of the very early journey, but I can share with you sort of how we built on the foundation that was there. So really, through building a hiring process that's really anchored on our values. So our values and our mission, of course. So really making sure that through the interviews that we run, through the hiring process that we run, there's ample room for discovering whether there's an alignment with those values. And when I say alignment, I actually mean like, are these candidates willing to operate within these operating principles, right? Like it doesn't even have to be something that they necessarily, follow in their personal life all the time. It's our values are essentially part of our toolkit that we believe are going to get us to our mission. And so it's about sort of, and it's these behaviors that we believe will get us to that mission. And so we really need people who are willing to operate with and can operate with those behaviors. And so we really try to look for those behaviors and look for evidence that they're in fact willing to operate that way.
Can you give maybe an example of how, I love how you said like you want ample room to discover that alignment with the values. What are some ways that you guys do that concretely?
Yeah, so like one concrete example might be we have this thing called a tryout, which is essentially the final interview. It's called the tryout, and what it is it depends on the role really, and it can take many different forms. But let's say in a leadership role, it will be along the lines of we'd like you to reverse interview us. Here's sort of 5, 6 people. I actually had 12 when I first joined, but you really get basically as many reverse interviews as you like. Learn about us, and based on what you learn, tell us how you see the next year. So you're coming in. This is the rough mandate we think we'd like to give you. Can you give us some color on how you're going to kind of go about achieving that mandate? And so as you kind of go through these reverse interviews, and then you put together your presentation. We really look for signs that those behaviors are there. So, for example, if we give you feedback during the presentation or challenge something, we look for signs that you're able to take that with humility and you're able to sort of learn from that rather than kind of, and not take it well kind of thing. But that's just an example. It's really something that we sort of do throughout the process.
Interesting. I definitely feel like I'm being reverse interviewed when I interview journalists because they're always the ones who end up asking all the questions. Obviously, founders aren't building a team in a vacuum, right? And especially with first-time founders, they're always looking for resources and things that can help them with this important question. Matt, I'd love to come to you on, what are some of the resources that you see founders turning to when they're thinking about building this early team?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few different components. Obviously, I can only kind of speak to the Deel kind of proposition and what we kind of leverage to build the team. And similar to Daniel, I joined around employee 200, but there was only 4 people in the UK. And when I was building out the team, I was lucky enough to have essentially the platform that is Deel. So when I was interviewing or essentially looking for the first 50 people to essentially build out the foundation of the UK team, I was able to go ahead and attract talent from anywhere in the world rather than just within the UK. So on that front, and I think probably similar to some of the organizations here that were potentially built, post-COVID or during COVID, where they really leaned into this remote work or, attracting talent anywhere in the world rather than the 30-mile radius of their HQ. It was a little bit easier and fairly intentional for probably most of them, including myself, where I wasn't necessarily looking for someone that was in London or in the region that I run. I was looking for the best individual for that job. And what we saw is people essentially coming in that we potentially work with at previous roles that knew what we were trying to build or that we already had a relationship with. So it was fairly low risk in that sense. So I think with that, it wasn't necessarily like a massive amount of products or tools that we had access to. It was just one really that allowed us to really lean into attracting the best people for the role, regardless of where they are, regardless of, location and kind of time, time and all that sort of stuff. So I think that was the kind of main lever that helped us in the UK scale so quickly, is that we didn't really shy away from interviewing people that weren't in a specific location. So that was the big one in the early stages, rather than looking at auxiliary services that we potentially use now with listening to gong calls and stuff like that. That was the main thing that really helped us get to where we were.
Super interesting. I know, Vanessa, you have thoughts on this, like hiring globally and all of that stuff. So I'll come to you later. But first, Ellen, I'd love to come to you around this kind of resource issue. When founders come to you for advice on building a team at the earliest stages, what are the kind of things that they need support on? What are the resources they need?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think a lot of our founders find a lot of value in connecting with each other and also connecting their people teams with each other, because that's really where the wisdom lies. I think we see talent teams, and there are a lot out there now, which is great, can be fantastic allies for this and connecting, but really the wisdom lies within the groups and also leveraging, founders that may be a step ahead and have made some mistakes and have, seen things go right and wrong that can then pass on the wisdom. So I think investors have a great role in making these connections, sharing some of the knowledge, and also doing some practical exercises. So just a quick example on the culture point that Daniel and Vanessa were mentioning before. We, using an external partner, we did this simple exercise where we helped first-time founders hiring their first employees define their values by just thinking, okay, what are the main challenges that my organization is going to be facing in the next 3 to 5 years? Listing that, and then thinking, what are the traits that as an organization we will need in order to overcome these challenges? And then really narrowing that down to essentially 2 or 3 things that you need to be hiring for. So instead of doing like big exercises, just doing, exchanging ideas on this topic, leveraging external experts, and making a concrete output out of it in terms of your employee value proposition and what you're hiring for.
Definitely. And that ties back to that kind of finding those people who connect with your vision, like Vanessa said, and then also, who connect with your values as well, like Daniel said too. Matt, picking up on something that you talked about, I loved how you said you're looking for the best individual for the job, regardless of where they were. How did you think about, the profile of person? Obviously they have to connect to the values, they have to, the mission has to resonate with them, right? But then what else is key core for that early team member?
Yeah, there's a saying, so I'm Canadian, I live in the UK, and there's a saying in hockey, when you're on a breakaway and you score on a penalty shot or a breakaway, it's act like you've been there before. So once you score on the goalie, you don't do like a crazy celebration. And I think about that a lot when we were building that team, right? So obviously hiring the best talent for the role, but I was also thinking about, okay, if we hire this person today, they can make an impact today, but what about tomorrow or the day after? Like, have they been in a similar organization that has scaled or hit the kind of mission critical goals that we have? And how do we go ahead and get the access to those people? And number one, attract them today, make sure that they're providing meaningful work and results, but also aligning with their future goals and expertise and experience that they essentially want to get to as well. So really, I think with the ability to attract talent anywhere, with the core of the team that had been built prior to me joining, 200 people, a lot of the people that we wanted to hire were via word of mouth from these people or ex-colleagues. So we really didn't shy away from the kind of ecosystem that they'd already kind of built up or developed over their previous roles. So I think that was a massive one for us. And then on the heels of that, I think up until 1,500 employees, both of our co-founders were still actually at the final stage of the interview. So it's pretty hard to hide from the 2 co-founders, especially when it's a product-led company and they were involved in the early stages. So I think that definitely weeded out some of the individuals that were potentially not the best fit, that weren't aligned to, again, kind of the goals or the values that we were trying to kind of promote internally at the time as well.
Interesting. Vanessa, do you want to respond to that? I feel like you have thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I just thought also as an extension of what's been said is, to me, what I noticed is like the first 50 people that join you need to have a different mindset than the people that join you when you're 100 and beyond. Because I think when we started, we needed a lot of people that are fine with not knowing everything and not having everything defined and not having structures and processes in place and coming up with them, or even living in a system for a while without it. And I think at certain scale, you need people that are actually then expanding on this and then creating scalable processes. And I think in the first few years, though, potentially processes make you slow if you're too much rigid on that. And I think there you need to find the people with the right mindset in the beginning that are able to actually just build things fast and unblock themselves and are able to not sit there and wait until somebody tells you what to do. And I think I think founders sometimes think if they hire people from like big scaled companies into their early stage startup that they would succeed. And usually it's not the right match. It depends on the person, of course. It depends on the company and the role. But I think you need to, be a bit more creative in terms of the hiring scope that you have in the beginning in order to really estimate if the person will succeed or help you in what you want them to do in the first few years, at least.
But then I guess those people that are the early ones that are people that can survive in this like real uncertainty, what happens when things get better and maybe like stabilize a little bit? I guess those need to be people that can also make that shift too, right?
Yeah, I think you need to have very adaptable people that are fine with the evolution of the company, right? They need to be fine with, okay, here's 2 years of like we are iterating and things are moving, and the process that we set in place 6 months ago is going to be a different one in 12 months, and people need to grow with you and have the ability to grow with you. And I think that is very important in order to also move fast as a company, but also in order to retain your people, right? You want to kind of hire people in the beginning that stay with you for a long time and not leave after a year because they expected something else.
Totally interesting. Daniel, what about that kind of like qualitative profile of the person that you guys look to hire in the early on?
Yeah. So I actually really agree with what Vanessa said. What I would add is, I actually think that you need that tolerance for ambiguity, not even just at early stage, but even later on.
Yeah.
So I think like it almost in just the past couple, if you just look at the past couple of years, right? So tech companies are changing so fast. We had COVID, we all went into remote work. Then money became more expensive, so we suddenly all focused on profitability and sort of became, efficiency became a key thing. So that led to a lot of change. Then we have Gen AI right now making waves, and sort of everyone's wondering what on earth it means for their business model. So change is actually I don't think it slows down even at late stage, right? So I think you need to extend that mindset of looking for folks who can deal with that uncertainty and ambiguity even at a later stage. So I really actually I agree with that, but I would even extend it and maybe just also react to Matt's point earlier about sort of aligning your so hiring folks that can do the work now, but can also sort of scale with the role. So really agree with that. And I maybe just another sort of thing I would add to that is often I hear this advice, like you should hire for the next 2 years, and then you don't know what's going to happen after that, but focus on the next 2 years, and as long as you get that right, it's going to be okay. I would to some extent challenge that and say that if you do a good job hiring folks that can think first principles, that are problem solvers, that can kind of look for root causes and actually don't just sort of follow previous patterns, you might just get lucky and manage to hire someone for 5, 7, 10 years. So I don't know if, I think that advice is very often incredibly helpful, but also I would challenge founders to think, okay, can I find someone that can do the job now and is going to be motivated with the job now, but actually can scale with it because they have that kind of first principles thinking mindset.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I wanted to go back to something, Vanessa, that you picked up on too, which is around this. People think, oh, I'm going to get this kind of shiny brand name person, right, who's worked at maybe a later stage tech company, or they've worked at the Googles of the world, the Amazons of the world, and that's going to fix all of my problems. Elena, maybe you have some views on this. I feel like sometimes founders are like, yeah, there's this amazing person, I'm going to get them. What do you kind of coach founders on hiring the brand name versus hiring maybe someone who's unproven and more scrappy?
Yeah, no, there's definitely the wow effect of, showcasing people in the network that have this, stellar brand names. But I agree with Vanessa's point around having that scrappiness, and also what Daniel said about being, open to change and being more scrappy. I do think, though, that the first hires that you make are setting the tone in terms of quality. So if you can achieve a combination, it doesn't need to be a brand name, but someone that combines the qualitative characteristics of adaptability, openness to change, and stellar background, whatever that may be for your business. It doesn't need to be, the big tech at all. But I think, setting that tone then also attracts more talent, because suddenly you're saying, oh, this startup is still really early stage, but look who they've been managing to attract. So I would say being definitely thoughtful on the scrappiness, but also being open-minded. I think, it really depends on the individual and the company.
Totally. And how have you coached companies around positioning themselves to attract that really star quality talent? Because I think sometimes it's hard if you're super early, like you're unproven, you've maybe raised a couple million, but like how am I to know as talent that you're going to survive in the next 3 years, right? And I should bet my career on you.
Yes, and that's where I think mission is really important, and really articulating your employer value proposition. I think some people think that means that you need to pay the best or, offer the best benefits, but actually you can define as a founder what's important to you and still attract your tribe. So we have a founder that very clearly says, this is not a ping pong office. We don't do pizzas. You come here, you work hard, but this is what we work for. And he's attracted a fantastic team through that, because you know what you're signing up for, you know what you're achieving. So I think being authentic in what you're creating, and also leveraging your network. I think some founders might be a bit hesitant in having people evangelize what they're doing. But just looking at, your cap table, for example, if you are VC backed, if you're not, maybe some angels or partner journalists, or whichever angle you can find to get what you're building out there, really helps. And I meet tons of people these days that would rather work for an, brilliant early stage motivated team than a later stage company. So the opportunity is there for the grabbing, I think.
Yeah, totally. Matt, how do you feel about this whole like brand name versus more scrappy, unproven debate?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think there's a couple of things kind of going back to what Elena just mentioned and Daniel mentioned a little bit earlier. I think the brand name aspect brings you credibility to the market depending on what kind of maturation point your business and your product's in. So for example, if you go ahead and bring in someone fairly senior from, let's say, I don't know, a Salesforce, they're going to bring that kind of market reputation where you've attracted someone and clearly this company's up to something if they can attract that talent. But at the same time, what kind of problems did that individual solve, right? Prior to joining Deel, I was a VP of a late stage startup where I had, 300 people under my remit. But just before that, I was at kind of a hyper growth company where I solved very acute challenges and I was really in the weeds. If I would have been someone that just came from that VP level where all the problems I saw were very macro, high level, where I didn't necessarily get my hands dirty, I would have probably, not done very well at Deel as a result of that, right? So I think, number one, has this person been in this role for X amount of time? What problems did they solve? Were they ones that actually, got into the nuts and bolts, or were they just providing the high level kind of insight and kind of strategy? I think the brand name can bring you that credibility, as I mentioned, but if they're only bringing that, then it's going to create some issues, especially if you're in that early stage growth part, because again, they're just going to be the name. They're not going to have the in the weeds experience as of late. So it might slow down, the kind of growth stage and whatnot. I think that's a big call out. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And of course, Elena, you touched on this a little bit, and when we're talking about hiring that superstar talent also is the question of compensation, right? And the balance between benefits and mission and compensation. Daniel, maybe it'd be interesting to hear from you around how you guys have approached the creating like a holistic compensation strategy that reflects the company's values and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's exactly what we've done, right? So we've essentially taken our culture as a backdrop, as a foundation, what are our values and sort of what is our mission and really what is the time frame that we think we will get to that mission, and then built our kind of compensation principles with that in mind. So it's without sort of going into too much detail, it's long-term oriented, so that it's highly indexed on equity. And in terms of base, really quite strategic in the sense that we sort of have a market positioning in mind that we don't really go under, because we believe we need to sort of compete at least at that level for the right people for us. And we sort of toggle the positioning depending on how competitive a particular role is. So that's kind of how we think about this.
And what about like other benefits, just cash and equity? Yeah,
so a huge investment that the company makes in our people, again, very much anchored to one of our values, which is we grow, is around learning. So we have an incredibly generous learning budget, which is roughly 10% of your salary on top of your salary. So whatever your salary is, 10% of that you can additionally spend on learning resources that can include, a pretty sort of broad spectrum of learning opportunities that you sort of have to align with your leader on. But really, I think I've actually never heard of a company that has this commitment, but we really do sort of put our money where our mouth is in this sense. We really do believe that if you're able to, a lot of your learning is of course going to be happening on the job, but if you're able to supplement that with targeted, well thought through learning, you're really going to supercharge your career, and that's what we want. We want to serve as effectively the career slingshot for people that come to Vinted.
No, interesting. Vanessa, what about you guys? How have you thought about that compensation?
So for me, I usually try to see salary and benefits a bit detached, because I think salary and base salary is not a benefit. It's like, that's what people work for, and that's kind of the key. So I'm not seeing that as under the umbrella of benefits. For us, compensation is like, the key aspect. Everyone has equity, no matter what role, and equity is a big part of how we measure or set our compensation strategy. It's one key driver. A lot of people have been with us since day one, and all of them are big owners in the end of Pitch, and to some degree. And our base salary is usually a bit more difficult or complex since we are remote. So we used to have some sort of location multipliers, which we are also, with the stream of remote work, also review constantly. So we might also simplify the current structure and look into a different scheme where it might be less structured in a way. But that is one aspect. And then in terms of benefits and how we support our team beyond, of course, the salary aspect is more catered around remote work. We have team events, we have team offsites where people can meet regularly throughout the year. We have a budget that people can use for fitness, but we also have a budget that people can use for therapy or certain coaching or certain, navigating certain life stages that might be difficult. And then we have, of course, also education budget, which is pretty standard nowadays. Not as good as Vinted though. But these are all angles. I think for what is more important for me is really now looking into the connection aspect of remote work. So how can our benefits help our team to stay connected to the company, even though they're not here in Berlin throughout the year. And this is usually the main thing that I have in mind when I think about benefits strategy as a remote company.
Interesting. Yeah, so that's one of the questions in the question and answer is around building remote teams, especially from the super early stage, right? Eleanor, how have you seen some of your portfolio companies approach that remote question?
It's really interesting because all the founders ask this question, and I think there's no, solution that works for everyone. We've seen founders, build exceptional teams that are fully remote from the get-go, and then founders that just like office culture, and that works for them. So the way that we approach it is that, whatever setup you choose, we can support you and help you by giving you examples of what has worked with other companies. But I think it really depends on the style of working of the founding team as well. And yes, obviously, the more remote you are, the better talent you can attract, the more creative you can be with compensation structures. But obviously, if you get energy from having people in the same room, then for some of our founders, that's just the way that works for them. I would say that in general, if I look at trends, there's definitely much more of a trend around when we do get connected. It's more around discussion, brainstorming, ideation and connectivity and social interactions. So companies have been very innovative with that, where they, even if they're remote, they really leverage those moments when they get together.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's also just to elaborate or to add something there. I think that's why I also think in the remote debate, it's really important to say that even if you're a remote company, doesn't mean you never work together in the same room. And I feel like sometimes in this debate, people forget that even though you are a remote team, you usually still meet at least a few times a year, and you kind of just want to be very intentional and structured around how you meet and why. And it's usually, as you said, brainstormings or plannings or doing a project kickoff. And I think having this as a defined island for connections with the leadership team or the broader team or for the project teams, I think that is very important and sometimes forgotten that this is usually part of the remote strategy when founders set that set the remote culture in place.
True. Matt, I feel like you would also have a unique perspective on this as well, both working with companies that are hiring people globally, right? But also as your own team, leading your own team, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So for context, we have 26 or 2,800 employees in 101 different countries, 100% remote.
Wow.
So to Vanessa's point, it's not like we don't see each other. Like as the head of the UK, I should actually change my title to like head of Spain because most of my UK hires defect to Barcelona. So we have a hub there. But we pull them into the UK. We just did our SKO in North America where 250 people went to Mexico City. We're planning ours right now
Nice.
Barcelona for end of August, early September. So it's not like we don't see each other and have these impactful conversations, but when we do come together, to Vanessa's point, we try to make it very intentional with who we bring, what value we try to provide to the people that attend. And then we always have leadership offsite or breakouts as well. So that way we can really coordinate and plan mission critical tasks or solve kind of mission critical problems. So I think a lot of people think that, someone's in, China and I'm in the UK and we only have 30 minutes of overlap. That's really not the case, right? I think with the growth and with what Deel's built and what a lot of these remote companies that are born into 100% remote work from the onset, they're very intentional with, number one, who they hire, the team that they build, the tools that they invest in to really create this cohesive environment, even if the time zones don't match up 100%, or even if they're not in the same office. So although they might be different time zones, they're still super tight knit and really involved in everything that they need to be involved in.
Yeah, interesting. Daniel, what about you guys at Vinted? How have you approached the remote versus in-person debate?
Yeah, so we have taken full flex hybrid view. So we sort of transitioned to hybrid during COVID, which worked really well for us. We have, I think initially we worried about collaboration, and I think that worry did not turn out to be, well, to some extent, of course, it turned out to be correct, but I think we figured out how to collaborate. What I think the next frontier is, not just for us, but I think in general for a lot of companies, is community, right? So I think what a lot of research seems to just suggest is that folks who work remotely lose a lot of that long tail of connections that they would otherwise have in the office. They still have a tight, close community with the people that they most closely collaborate with, but the kind of long tail of acquaintances in the office falls away. So I think this is a huge issue that I don't think anyone's solved yet personally. I think that, the question, it remains to be seen to what extent is innovation driven by that kind of long tail, that kind of broad community. So it's something that we're working very actively on through things like in-person events. We throw a huge, for example, event called Vinted Fest every year, where everybody comes to Lithuania for really a couple of days of spending time together, refocusing on our mission, and yeah. So that's kind of how we've approached it. I think if I may just add one last thought, if I were to counsel a founder today, right, I would basically tell them, I'd be wary of starting an all-in-person company unless you're certain that the location that you're in can really support all your talent needs, I think increasingly the market's also moved. Most people expect some flexibility, expect there to be a significant remote element to their lives. And so if you're doing all in person, you're probably even further restricting your market even more. So I would really think strategically about like, okay, in terms of talent I need to access, can I do that really in this one location, and will I find the right people?
Totally. And that kind of links to another thing that I wanted to ask the group about, which is building a diverse team at the beginning, right? Because I feel like, you know, if you get down the line and you're at 50 employees already and you're lacking in some areas of diversity, it's going to be really, really hard to play catch up, right? And part of that does also come to having flexible ways of hiring people so that you can expose yourself to a larger talent pool. Elena, how have you talked with early stage founders about the diversity topic?
Yeah, I mean, one final thought on the previous question, just to Daniel's point, I totally agree, but I would say just one last thought that it's a bit easier to go from in-person to flexing remote than the other way around. Just something to think about for the early stages. But anyway, yeah, sorry, to the diversity question. Yeah, we really are very passionate about this topic at Northzone, and we've really toyed, and experimented with different ways of supporting founders on this. And we found that what seems to resonate more is, rather than setting quotas, especially at those early stages where you want to move fast and you want to find stellar talent quickly, it's more about being thoughtful with benchmarking around the types of roles that you're hiring and the markets that you operate in. So we try and provide the best visibility that we can throughout our portfolio, but also the market around, okay, you're hiring engineers in Berlin. What is realistic for you in your sector, in your stage of growth? And how can we help you reach that number? And, you know, for some companies, it's about broadening the funnel. It's about having more strategic, diverse partners. For others, it's about timing. Something that worked really well in one of our companies is where they said, okay, we're going to make 3 strategic hires in the next year. Let's commit that, 2 of them need to be, female or ethnically diverse. And let's see, where we can afford to take longer, because this talent exists. It's just about, broadening the funnel, being more creative with the long list, working with search firms where you say, okay, I will only engage if I see a diverse list. So there's lots of tactics, but also combining that with being realistic and not slowing down the founders with unnecessary, restrictions or quotas where it just doesn't make any sense, especially in those early days.
Yeah, completely. Vanessa, what about you guys? How have you thought about this diversity topic? I think you're muted.
Sorry, the classic. So for us as, for me as a female founder, it was, of course, always important to create a company from scratch where, we don't end up having 100 people that are mainly, white male, whatever the historic association were to tech companies. But I think for us, we put a lot of attention to making sure that there is possibilities to interview different types of candidates and not just the superficially perfect candidate, and also by default putting out opportunities internally but also externally to people that are maybe not on paper the perfect person, but we believe in this person to actually grow into a certain role. I think there you need to sometimes just also give people the benefit of the doubt. I think we always actively promoted internally a lot of women into leadership roles, and made a big effort there. And I think this helps if you have also female leader or culturally diverse leader in place that have a sense for just being very very conscious about how we promote internally, but also just having some expectations when they hire. I think in general, we as a startup have never been very strict. We didn't put up like numbers in a way where we said you have to interview a minimum of 3 diverse candidates in order to make a call. But we just always, I think, when we made hiring decisions, made them with the intent that we really want to make sure that we actually feel good about this decision, no matter who we interviewed and why. And I think they're having this consciousness as a group or as an interviewer or as a hiring manager or department lead is, I think, to me, the most important thing. I think once you end up having these artificial quotas, then hiring becomes very sterile and very forced. And I kind of don't believe that these are also the good hiring decisions for both sides. Yeah.
Daniel, do you have something on the topic of diversity?
Yeah, maybe I can share a thought on sort of early stage, and then I can tell you a bit about sort of how we think about it at Vinted at a slightly later stage. So at early stage, I would say, I think to echoing some of the folks before me, if you start doing it early, if you start really paying attention to building a diverse team early, you're going to have a much easier time down the line. I think this is clear. What I would say, however, is I think at very early stage, you do need to, amongst all of your priorities, which is diversity, quality, speed, all of those things need to play into sort of how you hire. You also need to like the person. I don't think you need to like the people you necessarily hire at late stages, because I think that it's about being able to work together effectively and respecting each other and all that. But I think at earlier stage, especially pre-product market fit, you're doing something so difficult, and the setbacks are just so numerous. Like you've got to have some, you've got to genuinely like the people that you're working with. So I would also balance that, the importance of that at the very early stage with all those other angles. I mean, when I look at sort of later stage, diversity incredibly important. I mean, we see this every single day, that diverse teams just do better, come up with solve problems better, and so it's something that we take very seriously here at Vinted. Track everything, right? So everything from representation data to data around how folks sort of pass through our career levels. So we sort of track promotion data, track what sort of impact or performance evaluations people get, and what sort of biases do we see there. So really try to sort of raise awareness with our hiring managers and our managers across the board to think about this stuff, to check for their own biases, to run structured interviews, to make sure that this remains a key criterion, basically.
Yeah, Matt, I'm going to come to you on this one too. How does that play out at Deel, and then also with the companies that you are supporting in hiring?
Yeah, I can't speak for our co-founders, but we had an interesting case study back in the day when it was kind of early stages. And Alex is French-Israeli, and Shuo, she's from China. And both of them traveled quite a bit. So Alex split his time between Israel, Paris, and then the UK for school, and then they essentially met at MIT. So during their travels and during their studies, they met a lot of really diverse people through kind of everything that happened. And as a result of that, when they were looking at building Deel, they essentially hired a lot of the people that they'd come in contact with over their travels. So the initial 10 hires were extremely diverse. I think out of the 10, we have roughly, I think it's 5 or 6 still with us. They're split across Romania, the UK, and I believe the US. So with that kind of diverse start, and then really kind of building off of their diversity of these new hires, we really created a fairly diverse team from the onset. And then if you think about Deel's expansion as well, when we expanded to a new country, we actually hire people that are familiar with that market to essentially give us a leg up on the competition and essentially speed up time to market. So with that, we've obviously, hired the best individuals for the role. We haven't really shied away from, where they're located. So that's definitely helped us. And it hasn't necessarily been a massive, thought process to Vanessa's points in terms of how diverse they are, if we're having to check a box for specific quotas. However, now we're at a stage where we are trying to be more mindful of it, specifically in senior leadership positions. We do want to obviously have that diverse, different mindset come into to the senior leadership group. But in the early stages, we've really leaned into just hiring the best individuals regardless of the location. And with that, we built a truly diverse team. And kind of a side note, we've done quite a few studies on some of the fastest growing companies that we've seen on Deel, or that are just in the market that we work with. in most of them, if not all, have the most diverse teams. The fastest growing companies typically have the most diverse teams and typically the highest performing. So I think there's a ton of benefit to it just outside of checking a metric or checking a box. You get access to talent in new market, you get different mindsets, different exposure to experience. The benefits are endless, really.
Totally. Thank you for all your thoughts on all these things. We have a lot of questions. This is great. I love when the audience has tons of questions. So I'd like to move on to questions now. Maybe if the panelists, you can kind of put your hand up. I feel like some of these questions I know who I maybe want to put them to, but if there's one you feel passionately about, holler at me and I'll bring them to you. Going off of this, Matt, you brought up the leadership thing as well, and there's a really interesting question in here that says, Sifted wrote a great article on leadership depth a few years ago. I feel like one of the biggest challenges we still face, especially in early startups, growing from 5 to 50 and beyond during these last few years, is high potential employees rising into leadership roles far quicker than ever before, with less time and less investment to develop depth or role mastery before stepping up, and how that can negatively impact culture. What are the panelists' thoughts on the management and leadership department growing through this stage and how to tackle this? Super interesting question. And I love that this person knows more about Sifted articles than I do.
Good reference point. I'll have to read the article as well. But yeah, I think it's a massive challenge. I think with any sort of young company, you have these, rock stars that you assume because they're really good ICs, are really good in their role, that they could essentially lead teams. And I think there's quite a few studies kind of predating maybe even the Sifted one from the likes of Deloitte, KPMG, where the highest performing individuals typically are not the best managers because they're very individualistic focused. So I think it definitely takes you have to be intentional with, again, the kind of team you're trying to build. And, it's okay to potentially tell someone no because they're not ready and what you expect from them. We're going through this exercise right now where, the UK team that I run is, at an inflection point where we're starting to see high performers wanting to get into management. And it's, are they demonstrating the role, the things that you want to see or need to see in the role already? And if not, then it's likely that they're not necessarily ready to take on leadership and management. You should never have to tell them, what to do or what your expectation is. It should come fairly natural. So I think with that, you need to be okay to put your foot down and say no if you don't feel that they meet that criteria. So I think it is something that we see, but I think it's due to the fact that we're trying to solve an immediate pain with not having a leadership person in place, rather than just being mindful of the impact to the broader team if this does go wrong, really.
Elena, I see you with your hand up.
I totally agree. And I just wanted to add to that often we see, when founders are thinking through, and people leaders, when they're thinking through their organizational design and progression, sometimes there's this misconception where the more senior you become, the bigger the teams you need to manage, whereas actually there's some fantastic ICs that can add a lot of value in the organization if there is a path for them to do that, and some opportunity for lateral, hiring in other bits of the organization. So for example, we've seen, amazing technical leaders, maybe even co-founders, where they've ended up becoming, a key part of the later stage team, but they're not actually the VP engineering that's managing, 100 engineers. So, creating that agile org structure may be able to provide some room for that progression for the early stage stars.
Super interesting. Daniel and Vanessa, did you guys have anything on this to add?
I'm totally agreeing to everything that's been said on this topic. I think what is important is, of course, having, as a startup, and I'm representing, I guess, the startup perspective here, obviously, to provide growth opportunities for your team. But yeah, as we know, sometimes you just need a different skill set at a certain point in management that you probably don't have in there. But yeah, you need to find a good mix of still giving people that grow with you somehow this track and the opportunity to somewhat go close to their vision and hopes, and provide learning and development opportunities and support there. It's really hard as a startup, though, to have this as a focus, because you are usually lacking opportunities, you're lacking potentially budgets and all that. And you need to, as a founder or business leader, find ways to motivate your team and grow them without necessarily giving them this exact role that they sometimes want to take over. But yeah, it's a tough one as a startup to actually nail this when you're growing fast. I guess as a company like Deel and Vinted, you all have probably a lot of more room and possibilities to find little defined roles and maybe in between positions that can help people to grow without giving away the VP title to someone. But yeah, I'm curious also to hear what Daniel says, if you have something to add.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've got a ton of new stuff to say other than I concur with Matt that I think it's a really good idea to promote someone into that sort of leadership role based on their readiness for that future role rather than their sort of performance in their current role. I would just have a really honest chat with them and say, look, this is a bit of a bet here. You're going to have to develop much better self-awareness than you have right now. You're going to be accountable for a bunch of people. You need to know what you're good at, what you're not good at. It's going to be very, very fast. It's a huge transition. It may work, it may not work. Let's just sort of continue to have an open dialogue about that. To what extent it is working, to what extent is it not working? Let's sort of, really, really talk about it. And I think if you do that and you do sort of uphold that promise of having that open dialogue, then you can hopefully coach them along the way. And I think if they're not ready to scale with the role, they will probably realize it themselves too through those conversations. And that's a win as much as it is a win if they do scale with the role and stay and do fantastically and grow with you for who knows how long. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Elena, here's one for you. I think you probably have a view on this one. Someone's asking, as an early stage company, how crucial or not is it to work with specialist recruitment agencies to source and hire talent? I feel like this is something founders probably ask you a fair amount.
Yeah, so how crucial it is to work with specialized
recruitment agencies.
Yeah, I think there are different models that can work at those early stages. I think it goes hand in hand with, the question that we often get, which is when do you get someone thinking through people and talent, and when's that first hire on that side of things? I think it really depends on your hiring plan, how fast you're growing. I would say, we've seen it work effectively internally at the early stages where you don't need to pay, a lot of fees, especially retained fees. But yeah, I think the good thing is that there's a lot of different models out there now, be it embedded, agency, retained, exec, that can work for different stages. I don't know if anyone else has anything more insightful to say. I feel that was a bit too generic, but yeah, I found it really depends on the hiring rate.
Yeah, definitely. Vanessa, you're coming on.
Yeah, I mean, I could just add, I think when you're starting and you're having a small team and probably also a small recruiting team, I think you can definitely add some bandwidth if you have some people around that you trust on their network and that you trust on their knowledge of the scene. And I think if you have a very niche tech stack, for example, you need to do a lot of active search as a company to find a good pool of people that you could hire from, and having some specialized sourcers or tech recruiter that can help you in the early years to actually hire faster with a limited recruiting team that you have in place. I think it's gold if you have that, but there's not many really good recruiters out there that are actually that specialized in a way that it's actually really, really good candidates that they provide. So I think it's a mix of things on how complex your hiring is or how niche your hiring demand is, and then but also the type of recruiters that that you actually trust, that they don't just increase volume without actually adding quality to your funnel. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I'm gonna move to the next question. I love this, all these questions. Someone's asking if there are more examples of specific questions or exercises that worked to assess a hire's values, commitment, or ability to adapt. I know this was something that was brought up at the beginning of a conversation. Matt, maybe you wanna jump in on this one?
Yeah, I'm interested to hear what Daniel's is with this reverse interview thing here as well, because I'm sure he kind of got rinsed or got hit with a bunch of questions in his. But I think it's certain scenarios, right? Like I think if you create sort of like a scenario based role play in the interview process and then have like a discussion afterwards, it typically rinses out the kind of thought process that goes into the answers, and you can kind of allow them to articulate the reason why they're solving the problem how they're solving the problem that you presented to them, and kind of create discussion around that, and then challenge them on their potential assumptions or answers, and seeing the way that they react or answer kind of allows you to really firm up, number one, can this person solve a problem that we're potentially seeing internally today? Would this potential solution actually help the business? If it doesn't and you challenge them on it, are they open to the feedback? Is this person coachable? Is this person able to operate in this kind of environment? Like typically I think those sorts of scenarios are quite good. I think one thing that we see specifically with interviewing a lot is, without the scenario based kind of role play or situation, you can interview someone and they can give you all the answers that you expect, and you can just check a box and say, yes, they can do the job. But we know that people typically, potentially mislead on interviews, and without actually really challenging, the things behind the scenes, you're not going to get the necessary kind of insight that you need. So I think that's where you really need to put a situation in front of someone, let them troubleshoot it, let them solve it, and then walk away with your evaluation of their response rather than just have a list of questions.
Yeah, really interesting. Daniel.
Yeah. So I think it just depends on exactly what you're testing for. I'd say that if it's different values or different operating behaviors, principles, I think another thing that works is talk about their past and really just keep digging up until like just every detail. If they say, sort of to walk, have you recently dealt with a coworker that disagreed with you? Yes. Okay. What happened? And just literally ask questions until you really get the full texture of the situation. And I think that will give you a lot of important color. If I think about kind of ambiguity, tolerance for ambiguity, for uncertainty, one thing I would sort of recommend doing is look for pivots in their past. So have they sort of chosen, have they gone through sort of major life pivots, career changes? Have they sort of, and that can look like many different things, right? It can look like change in totally different industry, change a totally different role within the company that they were in. Perhaps they got dealt some sort of blow in life and how they dealt with that and sort of how they adapted to that. So those are the things that I would look for to check for uncertainty tolerance.
Interesting. So we're almost out of time. I can't believe it. We just have a couple minutes left. And so I always like to kind of end these sessions with a rapid fire session, so everyone can just kind of leave the audience with a takeaway. So I'd love to come around to each of you and just ask again, to come back to our theme, what's one thing that you would give to an early stage founder to take away from the conversation today? Elena, would you like to start for us?
I would say connect to other founders and be smart with how you use your network and get your mission out there.
Love it. Super good. Matt, you're next on my screen.
I think it's to be transparent. I think a lot of young companies try to almost oversell like what the role or what it'll essentially look like without actually giving them like kind of the good, the bad, the ugly of what stage they're at. And then often you have these people join and they're potentially faced with, culture clashes, or they're not aligned with, work hours or whatever it is in that kind of initial, stage. So I think just being really transparent with what your expectations are and level set with them from the get-go is paramount for bilateral success.
Love that. Vanessa.
My advice would be to not hire the first person too late. A lot of people actually hire or a lot of founders hire the first people person when they're 30 people or something, because then things start to get a little bit annoying and complex. And then this person is supposed to fix a lot of things. And I think the future of building actually a good foundation as a company is to have a people person at hand that actually cares about these topics, that is very intentional about how do we, what is the culture that we put in place together with the founders very early on is very important, because those are things that you can't fix with 30 people usually, because there's a lot of unwritten things already set in stone that already reflect a lot of the culture that maybe wasn't intentional. And I think that is a thing that I learned a lot when I see a lot of co-founders or people starting businesses, that it usually the people function is an afterthought that is supposed to fix things later, and that I would recommend to prevent.
Like that, Daniel.
Okay, something very specific. So if you really like the candidate in front of you and they're really impressed, maybe they come from a big brand, still run a structured, robust process to test whether they'll succeed at your company. If you don't do that, you very likely will miss, it's very possible that you'll miss some important red flags, and it gives a dodgy impression of your company. Because if you put someone through a really easy process, they don't really feel like they've worked for the offer, they don't really know enough about you, they're probably going to say no. So always run a structured, robust process, no matter how impressed you are with the candidate.
Love that. Great thing. Okay, guys, well, we are out of time. So I'm gonna end the conversation there, but thank you so much to everyone who joined us today and for all the great questions in the chat. I really feel like we covered a lot of ground in an hour, from remote work to compensation structures to, questions that you can ask in interviews. I feel like I personally learned a lot, so hopefully I can also take these learnings into Sifted and growing our team. A big thank you to our partner Deel for your support, and to our panelists for your insights. Thank you so much, everyone. And looking forward to joining everyone for the next Sifted Talk. The next one is in the chat. If you'd like to join us, you can see all the upcoming Sifted Talks at the link sifted.eu/talks. Thank you so much again to our panelists and everyone who joined us.